Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Fuel Gauge. I'm Eddie Kalegi here on WUB Network, America's Sports Leader. I have a snow day today from school, so that's why I'm recording it now. So, a lot to talk about. I haven't done one in a couple weeks, not since right before the Daytona 500. So there's a lot to talk about. So, I'm gonna first talk a little bit about Speed Weeks and the last restrictor plate race. Will we expect anything different at Talladega? Then I'll get a little into this package, what we saw at Atlanta, what we saw at Las Vegas. I'll wrap things up with a little talk about Kyle Busch. So we're going to have to start, though. Daytona, we had talked about most of Speed Weeks, but Speed Weeks was pretty fun. I mean, I know some people, there were some letdowns during Speed Weeks. The Xfinity race, obviously. That race was just upsetting, and you really can't blame the package. At first, I did, but then I realized the drivers were just scared to make any moves and risk their cars. I mean, I see where they were coming from, but from a fan's perspective, that race was like watching paint dry. Michael Annett, though, drove up to the front, ran a nice race, and was able to get the victory. And Colleague Racing looked very strong. They've looked strong this season with Ross Chastain running that one race, and then sharing the ride. You had, what you call it? Justin Haley, who's looked pretty good this season as well. So yeah, so that's the Xfinity race. The truck race, on the other hand, the Xfinity race, you had like nothing happen. The truck race was just a crazy wreck fest. You had that Jordan Anderson ridiculously hard crash. Corey Roper had a big wreck, and then towards the end, nobody was left. Only 9 trucks actually finished the race. 23 DNFs. Austin Hill, though. Austin Hill really showed that Hattori Racing, that vehicle, I don't know how they did it, but Hattori Racing has a very good truck and a nice little team. A lot of people thought, oh, it's just that Brett Moffitt is so good last season when he won the championship. He hasn't really been that good through the first 3 truck races. Austin Hill has consistently run well, and Austin Hill wasn't doing much when he was driving. I think it was Nice Motorsports, I might be wrong. But now all of a sudden, Austin Hill is one of the championship favorites out there in trucks, and was strong all race at Daytona. So, it's an interesting situation, but I think it's fascinating how good of a truck, Hattori Racing has. But that truck race was interesting. And then, of course, the Daytona 500. Some of it was kind of boring at the beginning, but that's been the tradition so far. All 3 cup races, a little bit of a letdown early on, and then it gets action-packed as the race goes on. My narrative that I preached in the last one, and it's proven right, I can say I told you so, about Matt DiBenedetto and Hendrick Motorsports, that they're going to have all the speed at Daytona and then they're going to disappear. Well, guess what happened? Matt DiBenedetto at Daytona led the most laps in the 500. He's finished 23rd and 24th, I think, in the next 2 races. Levine Family Racing is not Furniture Row Racing, as much as a lot of people, including myself, were hoping. It's not the case. But then Hendrick Motorsports, so strong at Daytona. All 4 Hendrick Motorsports cars led at least 1 lap. And they were working with Joe Gibbs Racing, which was also kind of weird. But even Chase Elliott, they've been disappointments at Atlanta and Las Vegas. But Daytona 500, I think, was a very good culmination of Speed Weeks, which had been harmed by rain and the new package. Good, proper send-off for restrictor plates. And speaking about that, it's really not going to be that big of a difference when we go to Talladega, because there was a thing where Jeff Gluck talked to Kyle Busch about this being the last restrictor plate race, and Kyle Busch was quoted as just smiling and saying that the tapered spacers are still restrictor plates. Now, I don't know, because people who were thinking Las Vegas was going to be like this ridiculous 36-car pack race, it was far from that. Yes, the cars stayed kind of close together, but it really wasn't noticeably obvious that there was a major package change. If you went into the stats, you'd see there was a difference, but I mean, is there a possibility we could see breakaways? I think it was funny though in the Daytona 500 when DiBenedetto. Let's see if I can name everybody that was in that pack. It was DiBenedetto, Johnson, William Byron, Chase Elliott, Kyle Busch, and Eric Jones. The six of them had gotten away from the pack and were in lap traffic. It looked like a race from the 70s or 80s, and I think we might see that back at Talladega. Yes, we will still see big wrecks. Don't worry, the big one's not going to go away. And yeah, let's talk about the big one. Speed Weeks, everybody rallying for Paul Menard at the beginning with Jimmy Johnson, the Jimmy Johnson wreck. Then all of a sudden now, everybody turns against Paul Menard when he gets into their favorite little Italian friend, Matt DiBenedetto, and causes the 19-car pileup. Matt DiBenedetto wasn't that upset about it. But then Denny Hamlin, who had some issues early in the race, really battled back strong, and such a heartfelt moment for Joe Gibbs Racing. They had the moment of silence on lap 11 for J.D. Gibbs, who obviously passed away in the offseason. And then, how about finishing 1, 2, 3 in the Daytona 500 with Hamlin, Busch, and Jones? A little surprised Martin Truex Jr. didn't have that much speed there. But yeah, so I think Speed Weeks ended up salvaging itself with a solid Daytona 500, proper send-off to restrictor plates. But now it's time to get into the important stuff, and that's the package. The new package, which somewhat debuted at Atlanta, and then the full form came at Las Vegas. And Atlanta and Las Vegas in races, in essence, were not that different from each other. Atlanta, the truck race, there was a big wreck at the end. Austin Wayne Self's entire front of his truck just like popped off in the grass, which is something they really got to fix, because that's the third time in a truck race in the last 3 years and a mile and a half where that's happened to a truck. It happened to Jordan Anderson at Atlanta. It happened to Mason Mingus at Chicagoland, and now it happened at Atlanta to Austin Wayne Self, which is the entire front bumper of the truck comes off in the grass. But anyway, that truck race was exciting. Kyle Busch got to victory lane. Really not much competition for him. Xfinity race, Christopher Bell held off Cole Custer and John Hunter Nemechek. I think Christopher Bell is going to have a pretty easy path to the title this season, especially with how frustrated he was losing it out to Tyler Reddick last season. Then the Cup race, there was a lot of passing in the beginning, and then everybody spread out, and people were kind of let down. In my opinion, I think the Atlanta race is the worst out of the three this season, only because, especially at the end where Martin Truex Jr., there is the noticeable difference that cars, if they are not in clean air, passes cannot be made. That is why Martin Truex Jr. could not get around Brad Keselowski in those final few laps at Atlanta, even though he definitely had the faster car than Keselowski, and probably just was going a little harder because Brad Keselowski, you knew he was sick with the flu and was driving hard, and I mean, driving in a hot car with the flu for 4 hours, it's a testament to him, but you know he was really on his last legs at the end, and he's got to be happy as heck that the package benefited him there, because Martin Truex Jr. was going to pass him, but dirty air was getting in his way, specifically Ricky Stenhouse Jr.'s air. And also, I do want to say, though, this is a little side note, but with the plate package, even though these guys haven't gotten great finishes, we have seen these guys that are typically good plate racers running much better than they usually do at mile and a half. Ricky Stenhouse Jr., Austin Dillon, Daniel Hemrick, Ty Dillon, David Reagan, all running much better than usual. They're good in the draft, and we'll get to that with Las Vegas qualifying in a couple minutes. But, yeah, Martin Truex Jr., good way to make up for what was not really a good Daytona 500 because he was not even close to the rest of his teammates. Eric Almirola had a good race. Kyle Busch was solid. Harvick was solid. Logano had some issues towards the end, but Brad Keselowski got to victory lane. Atlanta weekend was solid, but I think the best weekend of the season was Las Vegas. So I watched a decent amount of all three races. I watched some of the truck race, and then I watched all of both the Xfinity and Cup races. First off, K&N Pro Series, how about Haley Deegan getting her second win already at 17 years old? She is going to be a top talent. Um, I mean, even though I'm not really a huge fan of her being in the Cup Series on the 2019 update on NASCAR Heat 3, it doesn't really matter because she is going to be in the Cup Series at some point. They announced this week that she's going to be running some ARCA races for Venturini Motorsports, which is like the Hendrick Motorsports of ARCA, so congratulations to her. So I think, so just trying to think about this, when she could be in the Cup Series. So she's going to be in ARCA next season, so 2019, she'll probably be an ARCA regular and maybe run a couple truck races. 2020, she'll be in the truck series, and that'll be the first time we really... Pardon me, 2020 is next year. This is 2019, I'm stupid. Then 2021 is when she's really going to be on the scene, 19 years old in the truck series. And ideally, if she follows the right path, like we've seen people like Chase Elliott, Daniel Suarez, William Byron, just one step at a time. 2022, you'd be in the Xfinity Series. And then 2023, 21-year-old Haley Deegan could be a rookie. You know, maybe, I wonder, maybe by that time, would Denny Hamlin be retiring? Would they be interested? Would Denny Hamlin or Truex retire? Would maybe there be an opening at Joe Gibbs Racing? But, you know, it does also all depend on... if she sticks with Toyota. But anyway, not getting sidetracked. That was a fun race, though. But then the truck race was insane because there was a stack up on the first lap. Angela Ruck just completely took out Ben Rhodes early in the race. Then there was a big wreck with Sheldon Creed and a whole bunch of other people early on. And then it was just calm the rest of the race. Really wasn't a lot of passing. Kyle Busch was not able to get away as far as he did at Atlanta because Brett Moffitt was solid, Austin Hill was good, Harrison Burton was fast, and Kyle Busch ultimately hung on to win the race, getting him up to, I think that was number 195. Because, of course, you know, the whole thing with Richard Petty and his 200 wins. We will get into that to wrap up the show in about 3-4 minutes. Also on Friday, we saw Cup qualifying with the drafting package. I do not agree with qualifying with drafting because, well, first off, the racing league that I'm in, of course, we make sure to bar that as much as possible. I'm fine with having cars on the track at the same time qualifying. I don't think it's a big deal. Honestly, it adds a little more spectacle to the race. But you can't have everybody doing these drafting packages together. If you're at a drafting track, you have to do single car qualifying. Why do you think they do single car qualifying at Daytona and Talladega? It doesn't work. That's because then you don't have the fastest cars starting at the front of the pack. And what happens is, if you have cars that are not as good starting towards the front, you could end up having all kinds of crazy 3 and 4 wide to start the race, and ultimately a wreck. And nobody wants a wreck 3 laps into the race, taking out a bunch of good cars. So that's why David Reagan qualified so well. Austin Dillon, Daniel Hemrick, all 3 of them just faded. And like I said earlier, they all performed well because that drove like a plate track in qualifying. Not really in race trim, at least at the beginning. But that's the one thing. I'm not a huge fan of that. I think it was a good test just to see if it would work. But in terms of qualifying, I prefer single car, but anything NASCAR wants to do here with this package, I think it's very interesting. The experimentation that Steve Phelps has been doing now, taking over as the NASCAR president. It's been fun to watch with him and Jim France calling the shots, and it's going to be fun to see what else happens. Xfinity race was fun. Kyle Busch going for win number 196 in the NASCAR National Series. Wasn't easy, especially when Christopher Bell and Tyler Reddick came. Christopher Bell took the lead from Kyle Busch with 16 laps to go and then drove himself into the wall. That was just a nervous choke from Christopher Bell. Then good old J.A. Avila Jr. ended up bringing out a caution and put the field together. And then things got wild on that restart. We had 3 wide with Busch, Reddick, and Bell. Reddick got loose as he was trying to get by Kyle Busch. If he had made that move in turn 3 and taken the lead, that would have been it. Tyler Reddick would have won this race. But he got loose, hit Christopher Bell, Zane Smith in the wreck. John Hunter Nemechek slid a little. Cole Custer was also having problems. Somebody else also was involved. I forgot which other car was in the wreck. But, Austin Dillon was in the wreck. So it was a lot of good cars that were taken out in that wreck. And then Kyle Busch. John Hunter Nemechek made quite the run at Busch at the end, but wasn't enough. And Noah Gragson got third. So Kyle Busch got up to win number 196, was looking for his third career weekend sweep across the 3 series. And then the Cup race at Las Vegas came. Cup race at Las Vegas was very fun. The beginning was kind of a bit of a letdown because everybody was like, oh, they're going to be in these massive packs. But what ended up happening was Kevin Harvick had a 4-second lead 30 laps into the race. But there were still a lot of passes, a lot more passes than last season, a lot more green flag passes for the lead. First stage was a letdown. I will say that. But then the second stage came. You saw guys on different pit strategies. And also, you have to give a testament to the drivers and the crew because that first stage, they didn't know what to do. They were talking on the broadcast. People like Kyle Busch, Austin Dillon, Ryan Blaney. Their cars were so loose they didn't fit the package because this was the first time they were in race trim. Because no matter how much you practice, you do not get the full feel of a race until you're actually in the race. Because I'm sorry, if you're practicing, you are not going 100% like you are in a race. Even some of the race you don't go 100%. You're going about 80% in practice. So you really don't get the full effect of what you're going to see in race trim where everybody's going anywhere from 85 to 95%. So, second stage comes, and all of a sudden we got pack racing up front, these crazy moves that Logano, Keselowski, Busch, Truex, Harvick, Almirola, Ricky Stenhouse, and then Ricky Stenhouse and Eric Jones banging into each other repeatedly. Jones cursing out Ricky Stenhouse on the radio. That's going to be a fun feud to watch because, those are, especially Eric Jones is usually one of the more chill drivers. He almost fits in that group with like Jimmy Johnson and Paul Menard, drivers that aren't going to fight you, aren't going to get into arguments. But Ricky Stenhouse Jr. not making it easy for him. And then the other time when Stenhouse just rode into the back of the 20 when the 20 had to check up when the 48 got loose. But yeah, so the racing got much better in the second stage. Joey Logano really started to assert his dominance then. Then the third stage came. Kyle Busch all of a sudden looked like he was the fastest and was on a one-way route to a weekend sweep. And then the pit penalty. I can't believe how he sped out on pit road there. But he was going way too hard early in the third stage and ended up getting that pit road penalty. There were a lot of weird penalties in this race. Kyle Larson with too many men over the wall because a guy just flopped over the wall trying to grab a pit tire. So a lot of interesting pit penalties. There really weren't that many pit penalties the first few weeks of the season, but the Las Vegas Cup race was the start of that. So that got interesting. And then Joey Logano had a solid lead over Keselowski, but then here came Keselowski towards the end, and Brad Keselowski made it a good race. Turn 3, dove it down on the final lap, almost contacted his teammate. Roger Penske always tells his drivers to race each other hard. We've seen it many times before. We saw it back with Kurt Busch and Ryan Newman back in the days. You can see that attributed to IndyCar, where you've seen Castroneves, Will Power, Juan Pablo Montoya a few years ago race each other hard, even if they're teammates. He doesn't want to restrict them from trying to win for themselves because Roger Penske understands how much a win means for someone. So, anyway, Logano narrowly escapes over Keselowski. Another close finish. All 3 finishes this season have been separated by less than a car length, which is pretty interesting. So if you just watched the last lap, you'd see that plate package into play. But it wasn't as close as you might have thought. I think it's an improvement from last season, and I have no problem with the racing and the driver. I don't care what the package is. I don't care what the point system is. As long as you've got drivers that are passionate, that are having fun, racing each other, creating a fun spectacle for fans, and at the same time, there's a lot of competition and different people that can win a race. I'm happy. And that's what we've gotten in every race so far this season. So it's going to be a little bit of a change because ISM doesn't really fit that mold next weekend. There's no truck race next weekend, so it'll be the Xfinity and the Cup Series. I don't know if Kyle Busch is racing next weekend in the Xfinity, but as we said, he's 4 wins from 200. So, how do I feel about this? Because now I saw something interesting that Kyle Busch said in 2013 is that he doesn't even attribute Richard Petty's um, win total in the same category. And you know what? Kyle Busch, when he gets to 200 wins, that is a heck of a feat, and he deserves recognition. He's easily a Hall of Famer. He's easily a top 10 talent of all time. He's been very successful in the past. Only blemished on his resume was that period with Hendrick Motorsports. He just did not mesh in Chevrolet. But the moment he went to Toyota, Kyle Busch has prevailed in all 3 series. He's also a team owner. Don't forget that. Kyle Busch is just as much putting him in important NASCAR people. He has owned successful Truck Series teams. He owned the team that William Byron almost won the championship and won the most races in 2016. Year before that, he owned the championship-winning team of Eric Jones. This season, he owns Harrison Burton, who should be a championship contender. Noah Gragson last year. So he's a good owner. He's a good driver. Now, this is why, obviously, I look at this as a different angle than a lot of the other people that analyze NASCAR races here on YouTube, because a lot of them, motorsports is the sport that they follow. I fervently follow NASCAR, baseball, basketball, football, and even during like important things, golf, tennis, hockey, the World Cup. I follow everything. So, but the ones I really follow are baseball, basketball, football, and NASCAR. Now, I hate when people get into those discussions about the GOAT, especially, for example, basketball, LeBron versus Michael Jordan. I just hate comparing the GOATs. LeBron never happened, and it wouldn't be a true representation of who was better. And you really can't tell who was better. And that's why I always love the MLB, because everything with the Baseball Hall of Fame is, did you dominate your era? Richard Petty dominated his era. Dale Earnhardt dominated his era. Jimmy Johnson dominated his era. Jeff Gordon, had it not been for Dale Earnhardt and Jimmy Johnson, would have dominated his era. Kyle Busch is nearing that as being the dominant driver of the 2000 teens. I think Kyle Busch is one of the top 3 drivers of this decade, with Jimmy Johnson, Kyle Busch, Kevin Harvick as the top 3 in the decade, with Keselowski and Logano the next 2. I love Truex. I can't throw him in there. He's one really good season and one decent season last year. He's not up there yet, and really hasn't performed too good with JGR so far. But yeah, so is as good of a driver as Richard Petty, but I think he's very close, and you cannot compare the 2 accomplishments.